Okay, we are once again streaming, and this time people should be able to hear me. Oops. This time people should be able to hear me, um, and we will continue our discussions. There's going to be a first part of this video where only Mike's contributions are going to be audible, and apologies for that. But hopefully we can now um, move forward to shortly recap all of that. You can check out that first part to hear, uh, and we'll figure it out on the podcast to have Mike's part of the discussion. And I will maybe on the. That's just such a huge bummer. Okay, so how about this? We have discussed Black Panther Wakanda Forever quite a bit. I will probably try to recreate some of what I said about it um, separately, not repeating myself right here. And we can borrow what Mike said already in the other one, and we can just kind of sum it up as saying, you really liked it. I liked a lot of pieces of it, but ultimately felt like in some ways it maybe felt a little overlong. Some pieces of it didn't work for me quite as much as I would have liked, um, but still a good effort. And obviously, I think they did the best they could with a obviously awful real life loss of
Yes.
Chadwick Boseman.
And I
Um,
had the benefit of, because I chose to watch it over a couple of days, kind of like a TV show.
mhm.
Whenever it got into those places where it started to feel like it was going too long, like I could just turn it off, go to bed, and start it up the next day. So I never kind of experienced what you did, guys.
Yeah, because I had just a couple of times felt a little impatient with it. And so I think maybe by taking a little break at some of those moments, which you might have even just kind of instinctively chose
It
to
kind of
pause
felt
it
like,
at the places where it would slow down a little bit, right?
yeah, because it would kind of slow down and be like, okay, oh yeah, it's about an hour in, so I'll just turn it off now. And yes, I think it was definitely, I don't remember exactly where I stopped it each night, but it did feel natural. Like it was
Yeah.
kind of slowing down, like, all right, like
Hmm.
we're kind of leading into the next thing. So I'm gonna take
Right.
take it. And then you start it new, and then the slow part is like reconnecting you to the movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas you're just like, all right, get on with it, you know? Yeah.
Right. So in any case,
Anyway,
I feel like it's perhaps unfair to hold it to the same standard as the first movie, which was great. Um, because this one's kind of doing, some other things, and it had some other things forced on it. I think it does some of those things well, but overall, I kind of didn't care for it as much as the first one. But
I do agree with that, but
mm,
I was,
but that's a very high bar.
yes,
Um,
it had phenomenal visual effects. It had,
I will maybe push back on that just a little bit, only in context for I think most of it is fine in the way that like all of these superhero movies are able to do the super powered fighting and flying
mhm.
and so on. But I will say that perhaps this is once again uh, a comparison that's not as fair as it ought to be, but I didn't think that Talocan looked very good. Like it was just weirdly dark down there, which sure it's at the bottom of the ocean. It makes sense. It makes sense, I guess, that it would be dark, but it doesn't make it look good. It didn't look like the parts that we saw didn't look nearly big enough to support the level of forces that they claim to have.
I would agree with that part. I didn't necessarily feel the way of your first comment. I mean, I didn't.
Yeah. I
It was
think
dark, but it didn't really matter. That part didn't matter to me. But I
yeah.
definitely agree with you that it did not feel expansive enough, considering like that they were supposedly like so overpowering
Yeah.
in numbers, not just strength, right? Like,
Right. I mean, cuz what do we see? We see basically like three locations and none of those are very big.
right,
One of them is like a bedroom, and one of them is like a small street market, right? And then one of them is a throne room, and like that's really kind of all we see down there. Um,
right. Especially, and the things that he's showing us there are all like their normal day-to-day life, but yet they
Hmm.
have all these troops like housed somewhere that are, you know, phenomenal fighters. So I'll agree
Yeah.
with you on that, you know.
It's
Um,
but yeah, but I think I maybe wouldn't be so hard on that stuff if it were not for Avatar: The Way of Water.
Fair enough. Yeah. I yes,
Yeah.
which is obviously way better. I was just looking through the things it was. I think it the
Yeah, I
things it's
mean,
nominated
the
for, I think
special
it
effects are fine. Yeah,
yeah,
like
it should be
let's
nominated for it. It
yeah,
was good
so
enough to be nominated. It was good. The I think the costume design is interesting.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah, the costumes are great. Let's see. So visual effects it was nominated for um makeup and hairstyling. It had 3 nominations total. Lift Me Up original song. That's 3, and then
nice.
Angela Bassett as best supporting actress.
Yep.
And I think I must have missed one. Um, let's see, because I think there's 5 total. Um, costume design. So makeup and hairstyling, costume design, original song, visual effects, and then supporting actress.
Go do something else, guys.
Angela Bassett, of course, is great, and so she's a good nominee there, and like all of the others are the technical sorts of effects that or technical sorts of awards that often are is what these superhero movies are relegated to.
Yes, but I think it's deserving of nominations in all
Hmm.
of those.
Yeah,
But that's probably a good segue
yeah,
into
yeah. Let's
Avatar, which
let's
is
Avatar,
mm,
it's just such a weird phenomena because certainly online, lots of people made a lot of hay over this idea that supposedly for being such a big success, Avatar had like no cultural impact. Like people don't think about it very much, they don't talk about it very much, like like a lot of people would say, like you can't even name 2 characters from it, and so it's one thing to say all of those things seem true. People talk about like nobody writes fan fiction for it, nobody cares about it, and so before the sequel comes out, everyone's kind of like, why do we care about another sequel to this movie that nobody talks about anymore? And Cue Avatar: The Way of Water making $2.2 billion last year. Um, Speaking of which, the huge mega success Top Gun Maverick, which also did incredibly well, made $1.5 billion. So it's one of those things where, as much as people can point to all of those other cultural signifiers to try to imply that this movie is not a big deal, the box office tells the story. It's like, how can you really argue with that? I
and I would put out there that I think the 3D part of it that it does very well also impacts those other things
mm-hmm.
because it makes secondary viewing, home viewing, watching it again and again, all the things
Yeah.
that are required to like remember all the characters and like create the fan fiction. The world is not as immersive when you aren't in the 3D environment. It's
Yeah.
not it's not bad, but it's not the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it I think that impacts it, right? Like
Yeah, no, I agree because so much of what made the first movie and in turn the second movie a big deal is that it is just such an incredible spectacle to see on the huge screen in the good 3D with the sound and all of that whole experience of seeing it in the theater like that. And so then once it's been out of the theater for several years, and if people have revisited it at all, it's only on a smaller screen. You can understand how like the power that it had as the spectacle wears off some. And so it makes sense. It's also worth noting that as far as the box office stuff was concerned, like I said, $2.2 billion. Although it's also worth noting that that consists of 651 million domestic and 1.6 billion foreign, compared to Top Gun Maverick, which actually beat it in domestic with 718 million, but less in foreign. So the balance is
Yeah.
off. But then again, that's also very much in keeping with the way these movies have worked in the global market these days, which is the big ones that are just a lot of special effects and acting, special effects and action, tend to be the ones that do extra well worldwide because it's so easily translatable to everyone, right?
Whereas Top Gun Maverick, I mean,
Yeah, it's a very American movie.
it's very American.
Yeah,
Yes, it's appealing to a very things that Americans really like, and
yeah,
foreigners are probably watching it with the eye of like, this is what we think Americans are like,
yeah, yeah. And
and,
so,
and they're not wrong.
yeah,
Yeah.
what we talked about Top Gun Maverick. Good
Yes, I
movie.
know. I'm just
But
saying.
yeah, but I just mean we can understand why the balance would be different for that one, domestic versus worldwide, compared to Avatar: The Way of Water. But
Yes.
nonetheless, even just going by domestic, Top Gun Maverick would have beat Avatar just domestically, but it still would have been number two. And so it's obvious that a lot of people went to see it. But I wonder if some of what's happening, because all the people pointing out these little cultural signifiers, like, they're not entirely wrong about what they're saying, right? It's more just a matter of James Cameron is just doing something different with movies than anybody else is.
Yep.
He's kind of a unique individual in that regard. He is making a movie that is just a great big good time at the movies and isn't necessarily really trying to do more than that. Like, he's driving all of the technology forward, but like, he's not the one who's really focused on, like, he is so not focused on home video sales and streaming and all of that stuff that, like, some of his movies like The Abyss and True Lies literally not available on Blu-ray, which still seems insane.
Yeah.
So like, that's how not focused on that stuff he is. And so here, and everyone kind of joked about the idea that he is locked himself in a cave making Avatar 2, 3, 4, 5 when people have already forgotten about the first one. It's such a strange, like, there's nobody else doing quite what he does. And yet, my own personal take on it, we've talked about this before, you and I'll say it again on the podcast here, which is to say, I am one of those people who loved Avatar in the first place and never stopped liking it. I was never one of the people who decided to retroactively decide they didn't like it. I think it's entirely fair if someone didn't like it the first time. That's okay. But I think that there were also an awful lot of people who saw it in the theater originally and thought it was awesome, and then kind of let cultural osmosis convince them that it was a bad movie later.
Yes. And I think some of that has to do with, I mean, there's sometimes something being popular, like there's like a thing
Yeah.
with like wanting to not like the popular
Yeah,
thing.
that there's definitely a backlash that gets created because it's so successful that, it becomes cool to be the one who sees through all that. Now, one thing that I do want to talk about a little bit with Avatar: The Way of Water is that, like, first of all, I don't think either of us have even said at all if we liked it. I did.
I loved it,
Yeah.
and I also can say so. We took my nieces and nephew to see it.
Mm-hmm.
They are 13, 11, and 9,
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Oh, that's a great range for the kid characters in this movie.
Yes. The 13-year-old and the 11-year-old, like the 13-year-old especially, like when we walked out of there and we're like, "Hey, did you guys enjoy it?" She looked at us and she's like, "That was awesome." the 11-year-old was like, he was trying to be a little more cool, but he's like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was pretty cool. And the 9-year-old, she enjoyed it, but it's more intense than what she usually gets to watch,
Mm-hmm.
like in her home life. Like she doesn't, she's not, they're not, they don't watch a ton of grown up movies. Like they spend their time either not watching movies or watching some of the stuff that's like more kid friendly. So she just hasn't been exposed to a lot of this stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
so this was very new to her. We had permission, and her dad came with us. But and there's some things like, and a guy gets his arm severed
Yeah.
in 3D and it flies at you. Like that stuff's a lot for a 9-year old.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like after she kind of calmed down and like realized that was like, I think she just needed to realize like that's what makes it exciting, is that it's kind of intense,
Yeah.
right?
It's
Like
yeah.
being
There's
intense
parts of it
doesn't,
that would be pretty
yeah,
scary for a 9-year-old, I think.
right. And it's
Yeah.
that it's not, and understanding that the scariness is not real. The
Mm-hmm.
scariness and the adrenaline that comes from that is like actually what you are exposing yourself to, right?
Yeah.
And so she kind of grew into it. Like we talked about it a little bit, because I took her for like a really long like walk the next day down by the canal, and we just kind of talked about it, and she kind of made her peace with it. But anyway, they loved it when it all came down to it, and I enjoyed it, and Abby loved it. And so
Mm-hmm.
the fact that Abby and I have very different tastes in movies. Obviously, 13-year-olds, 11-year-olds, and 9-year-olds all have different tastes in movies. And two are girls and one's a boy. And
Mm-hmm.
at that age, there's just so many different perspectives. And for everybody to leave and say that this was really a fun time, that's what he's doing. Like
Mm-hmm.
he's just making a thing that's just fun for people to go to.
Well, and it drives filmmaking technology forward because he's
Yeah.
so into, you know, doing effects in his own way and not being satisfied with the way everyone else is doing it, and really driving that stuff forward in because like one of the things that the people who talk a lot about special effects, I saw some videos and stuff going around was just pointing out. First, it's important to remember, and this is fine. This is not a problem or a complaint or anything. Most of the movie is CGI stuff, right? Like it's just that's mostly what you're seeing on screen. Very little of it is physical, right? But think of every scene that Spider is in, because he's real, or at least presumably much of the time he is.
Right.
But he is just seamlessly interacting with all of these Navi that are like twice his size and doing action sequences with them, and it all just works. Like I don't think I noticed a single clunky moment, and I saw it twice. It's really incredible. The just on a technical level, the movie is unparalleled, I think. And so, like, there are plenty of other movies this year that did good visual effects, but it would be, I think, frankly ridiculous to give it to anything but Avatar.
Yes.
One of the things that I started to touch on before we jumped back to that, I do want to talk just a little bit about. There were some people who wanted to boycott this movie because they felt like he was doing cultural appropriation of indigenous cultures, and I think on the one hand, I certainly don't want to be like dismissive of people's feelings if that's how they feel about it. But and maybe there's some room for saying it's true that there's an awful lot of white actors in this cast for a story that it seems to be primarily about indigenous people fighting off invaders. But it's not the whole cast, right? And there's a lot of work put into having people representative of some of these cultures that it's taking inspiration from be part of the production and try to make sure that all happens in a sensitive way. And I my own take on it was that I think we can respect the people who felt like it wasn't good in that way, but I think it's also in some ways kind of a thing where there's almost no way that he could do it that would satisfy everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's a little bit of a like if you're If it's sometimes a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, you just kind of have to um, be at peace with not being able to make everybody happy. Um,
Yes.
and so, like I said, I'm not saying he's beyond reproach or criticism, but it seems to me that he did a number of things that he didn't have to try to be sensitive to this stuff. And it wasn't enough for everybody, but that's not the same thing as saying he is entirely tone deaf to the situation. Um, so that was kind of my take on that whole thing, but I thought it was worth mentioning.
Yeah, I think that you pretty much echo the same way that I feel is that I recognize what people were saying about it. I felt like you said, it just you're not going to make everybody happy. I think it pays homage to indigenous cultures as much as it does appropriate,
Mm-hmm.
if not more. Sometimes paying homage to something is not appropriation, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
so, but I also recognize that I'm not the expert in that, and
Mm-hmm. Well, and you
people
know,
feel the way they feel. Yeah,
yeah, it can be complicated, and I think that probably in hindsight we could say maybe we imagined that if more of the cast, like several of the cast members, like Cliff Curtis as Tonawari is of Maori descent, and then several of the other like smaller characters are, but like his wife is Kate Winslet, right? Not known to be a person of color. I mean, she's great. I like Kate Winslet, but she's not of indigenous descent. And then, of course, we have all the kids, or at least Sully's kids, are played by white actors, and so like we like that. We could theoretically say maybe that would have been better, but like that's to my mind, I think that um, there is at some point you can respect the feelings of people who didn't like how it was done at the same time as not necessarily feeling as strongly as they do about it.
correct.
But yeah, so I wanted to touch on that. But yeah, just so much of what it does well, like like the first one, it is not trying to do anything overly complicated with the story. I think the story is actually perhaps a bit better than the first one. It's a little bit more complex. It's a little bit less easily sortable into the whole white savior narrative. Um, uh, to some extent, there's like, there's some pieces of that still there because it's just kind of baked into the premise at this point.
Yes.
But by and large, it's a little bit more like uh, respecting. Well, I don't necessarily want to go too much into that, but I think the story is a little bit less built out of only standard tropes. And it's doing several things that are not unheard of, but it's remixing in a way that feels a little bit less similar to several other movies.
Yeah,
Um,
I liked the fact that I liked how it played all of the different cultures that
mm-hmm,
we had going here. So you have the mountain people coming to live with the water people.
mm-hmm,
So there's already that cultural divide.
right.
But yet then these mountain people also have the white guy
Mm-hmm,
and the mixed kids.
yeah.
And so the complexity that it kind of and the way that it deals with that in a way that felt very real and mature.
Mm-hmm,
Like I enjoyed that. I thought that was a good. It never took the easy way, right? It was
right.
never just like, oh, we're gonna. It didn't feel like something that you would watch on like a TV show where they just took some headline
Yeah.
from something that was going on with race relations and tried to like make it into a
Right.
drama.
Like there's
Like,
texture there, but it's
yes,
not heavy handed.
right. It feels very organic in how they relate to each other, right? And
Mm-hmm.
they and the way that truly people relate to each other, where it's like there's the skepticism and hesitation because they are different cultures,
Mm-hmm.
but then there are actual like personality
Right. Well,
conflicts
and some of
that are
that cultural
separate, right?
difference is
Yeah,
meaningful too, and not just a cultural way, but in the way of saying, you don't know how to do any of our stuff. So how are you
right,
going to contribute? You will need to be helped with everything.
right.
Because
You
all
are
of your
become a
skills
burden
don't
on us.
apply here.
Yeah, you will be
And
a burden on us, no matter how much
right.
you want to help.
And
Yeah,
so, like, there's an element of the immigrant story in that regard, right? So, and then as you said, the whole point about, because Spider is already kidnapped by the time they go to the Water People, so that part doesn't come in. But they do certainly bring up the idea that Jake Sully and some of his kids have 5 fingers, and some of them have 3, like the native Navi. So and that means that some people say that means they have demon blood, right? And so that sort of thing is part of the story too. But like at the same time, it becomes this process of we watch them working hard to learn all these new skills so that they won't be a burden, coming to care about the things that the water tribe cares about, and then and in many respects too, like I think one of the interesting things that it does about the whole situation is it grapples with the very difficult question of what it means to try to fight back in this sort of a situation, right? Because one of the things that was kind of came up in the controversy when this was coming out was an old interview with James Cameron where he said some things that sort of suggested that if Native Americans knew all of the history that we know now, they would have fought back harder, right? Which does kind of suggest that white guy now knows better than the people who actually went through it then. And I think to some extent there's some fair criticism there, but it's also true that it's not necessarily about just thinking better as much as what did actually happen, right?
right.
You have the historical perspective that the people in the moment obviously don't. But at the same time, it was a clumsy way to say what he was trying to say, which is to suggest there are times in real history where someone is facing an enemy with superior technology and has to decide, like, do we fight back, which could risk total annihilation, or do we try to find some sort of a compromise that allows us to survive, right? Like, that's a tough question. There's
Mm-hmm.
no easy answer to that. And what Sully is trying to do at the beginning of this is he's trying to see if, like if they're so focused on him, maybe if he leaves, they'll leave the rest of those people alone. And so he's trying to just hide and not be part of that fight anymore.
Right.
But ultimately, it just kind of comes down again to it doesn't have to just be about him, even though like some of the trouble starts because they are looking for him. But it's also true that really just brings the encroachment of all of the other humans more into conflict, right? Like it was always growing anyway. Like they were hunting the Talakakun, the whales, right? They were hunting them, but they were just making sure they were doing it way out to sea so that they didn't bother the people living in the shores.
Right.
And so the people living in the shore also only knew that, so and so didn't come back, and that sort of thing. But having, the whole situation evolve over the time gap is interesting. Like, for example, humans are coming back, but now they're coming to stay, not just to mine, because they kind of need to. And that changes that a little bit. Having it be whale brain goo instead of unobtainium, I think is probably like it's partly to try to just move away from the fact that a lot of people didn't like what they saw as a silly name for unobtainium, even though like it is a, there have been many other movies that used the same term because it is an existing scientific sort of jargon term for a material with unusual properties that you speculate. Wouldn't it be great if you had a thing that was like this,
Right.
but you don't actually have any, right? And so that's unobtainium. It's an established thing. You can find references to it going back to like the 60s. Anyway, but they wanted to move away from that, I think, which is sensible just because people thought it was silly. But I don't know. I mean, the whole whaling story I thought was great. Especially with the having the complexity of it of the younger son bonding with the one of the whales that is considered like a rogue, an outcast, because he tried to fight back, and that whole thing, and them, like the idea they treat him like a murderer because he encouraged people to fight and they got killed. So it's not that he killed them directly, but they died because they followed him. Right. And then so he's treated as an outcast and a murderer for that. And then just having this giant space whale be an actual real character is really cool. There is one silly moment though, like the first time that what's the whale? I want to say, is it Takakun? Is the whale's name maybe, right? I'm forgetting the terminology now.
Yeah, I don't remember.
But in any case, like the first time he just talks and there's actual subtitles for him is a little bit of a laugh moment because it's kind of a surprise. We don't really expect it. But at the same time, I think everyone in the audience laughs and then just gets over it right away. It's fine. He's like, oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, we understood that they were going to be smart so they can actually talk and we can understand them. Okay, cool. But then just having that character be an actual character, like the whole bits where like he's trying to help his little buddy and his buddy's family, but he's just realizing I'm not going to be able to help them unless I just really get into this. And there's a bit where he like swims down to the bottom and he's like thrashing around in the coil because he's pissed off that it's like, oh God, I can't believe this is happening again. Like I thought, oh, that was great. It just works. Yeah. And and so we don't necessarily have to go plot beat by plot beat, but I think there's a lot to like in this movie. Technically, it's incredible. It's a lot of fun. It's just a big fun movie to watch in the theater, And I'm not saying I think it should be Best Picture, but I think it's gets the nomination.
Oh yeah, and part of the whole thing about not going through a plot beat by plot beat is it's just. I mean, the plot is good, but it's designed.
Simple. It's straightforward. Yeah. Like there's a lot of world building, profound. But the actual like the story is straightforward. The story on the level of what do the characters want, what happens if they don't get it, why now, right? Those are the very basic storytelling questions, and that stuff is always clear throughout the movie.
Yes.
And that's good storytelling in a way that James Cameron has always excelled at. He is just so good at those just basic building blocks of storytelling,
Yes. Well, and I think that part of is what works against him in this when people are, kind of criticizing some of this stuff is that he's not building this thing to be this epic, profound, take on whaling, indigenous people, whatever. Like it honors those things and leans into those things the way that it needs to just tell a really fun and interesting story that people enjoy going to watch.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't change anybody's life. Like nobody leaves that and is like, I'm gonna save the whales, right? Like that's not what it's doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay sometimes, right? Like sometimes we can just go and spend a couple hours just having a good time with our friends and family.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Avatar: The Way of Water, good movie.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm gonna run fill my water because my throat's been kind of itchy. So if that's
Sure
okay,
thing.
it'll be quick.
Do you want to talk about Elvis next or the Batman?
Let's go Elvis.
All right, so I'll kind of just introduce while you're refilling water then.
Good work.
So the next movie that we're going to talk about here is Elvis, the Tom Hanks and Austin Butler starring Baz Luhrmann film. It is a biopic, or I guess some people say biopic, even though that sounds dumb and those people are wrong. Um, about Elvis Presley, and I think it does a lot of things that are, well, I mean, it makes some big swings, is what it does. I ended up really liking it, but it's absolutely the sort of thing that I can see people not liking because, again, it's what Baz Luhrmann's best movies do is take really big swings, and sometimes they connect more than others. And I felt by and large like this one connects pretty well. And so mostly it's just telling the story of Elvis Presley. It Not everybody necessarily likes that it sort of uses Colonel Tom Parker, played by Tom Hanks, as like the framing device for telling the story. But by and large, it's just Elvis Presley, certainly a fascinating and interesting person that has already had several movies made about him, but this one is doing it with a style that's different than what we've seen before. So let's see, it had 8 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, and let's see, Best Picture and Austin Butler as Best Lead Actor. No Best Supporting for Tom Hanks, because I think to the extent that people don't like this movie, I think he's usually the part that they don't like. Um, we'll get into that more in a moment. But then we've also got Best Production Design, Best Cinematography, Best Costume Design, Best Makeup and Hairstyling, and Best Sound.
Yes.
Oh, and Best Film Editing as well. So lots of nominations for Elvis. So I think I kind of got into a little bit of my own take on it. But what about you? What did you like Elvis?
Loved it. Uh, Sorry, I live in a 3-story place, and when I got down to get the water, the dogs gave me the look of like we need to go outside, so I had to go down to the extra floor, let them out, and then run back upstairs. So
So out of breath. Um,
out of breath doing a podcast.
yeah.
Yeah, I thought this movie really captured, like, obviously I'm familiar with Elvis and I knew some of the arc of him. I thought this movie really told that story,
Hmm.
right? Of all, it had all the beats of the things that when you know about Elvis, like he came from the, you know, just kind of this poor guy who kind of, and it did a good job. Again, we talk about appropriation. Like he didn't wasn't doing it to a, like, at least in the way the movie tells it, in the way that feel like it was too, he wasn't appropriating black music. Like he was immersed in black music, and
Hmm.
that's like what he knew to sing, and he
Yeah.
happened to do it very
Genuinely
well.
influenced by it in an organic way in his actual life.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I think it showed that really well. It showed the way that he kind of got taken advantage of, his meteoric like rise to fame,
Hmm.
and then the whole weird, like, how did he get involved in the strange Vegas thing that like made the
Right.
whole meme of fat old Elvis, like where did
Yeah.
that come from, and how he got there, and like how he felt trapped there, and why he was so sad there, and it was ultimately like a beautiful story about who he was,
Hmm.
and a tragic story about what happened to him.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I liked it a lot too. As I was kind of saying when I was introducing it before, I feel like, without exception, The people I've heard from who didn't like it, what they don't like is Tom Hanks as Colonel Tom Parker. They call his performance cartoonish. They don't like how much time is spent on that character. Um, I mean, I didn't feel that way, just because, especially the way that they use his character to sort of frame the whole story. Obviously, there is more to Elvis than Colonel Tom Parker, but it's just ridiculous to not acknowledge how big an impact Colonel Tom Parker had on Elvis's life, right?
Right, both positive and negative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so the idea that so I guess mostly probably the emphasis on him comes from, or people who didn't like the emphasis on him. It just comes from people who just didn't like the performance, and it's true that Tom Hanks is giving a pretty heightened kind of cartoony performance. But I
Yes.
felt like it's very in keeping with the sort of heightened style of the filmmaking generally. I didn't have any problem with it, honestly. I mean, the thing is, we look back at Baz Luhrmann's career, and he has not actually made all that many movies. Um, like he made Strictly Ballroom in 1992. Good movie, but kind of not all the way there in terms of where he's going to get to. Romeo and plus Juliet, great. Moulin Rouge, great. Australia, kind of a weird misfire.
Yeah.
Great Gatsby, pretty good. Like it's got some good stuff in it. I don't like that story. I think Great Gatsby is a bad story, personally. That's just my
It's
opinion.
an odd story, and
Yeah.
he tells it in a way that I feel like actually is true to the story. Like
Mm-hmm.
it gives a surrealism that the story kind of, in my opinion, commands.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah. So I mean, so that's my own take on Great Gatsby generally, like even the book. But like I think that there's a lot of great stuff that he does in that movie. But then he did some shorts that mostly he wrote as opposed to directed. Um, and then like Elvis.
yeah.
So like it's not that big a career as a filmmaker. Let's see if I can actually get the. Let's see. Actually, that's the writer. You know what? Hang on. Hang on. Let me make sure I'm not saying this wrong. Um, so there's a few other. Let's see. No, because he pretty much only directs stuff that he wrote. Yeah. So that's he directed one episode of a TV show called The Get Down, which I didn't see any of, since I don't know anything about that. But yeah. So that's. But like you look at all of those movies that he did, big style is literally his. That is what he does as a director. Because
Yeah.
like you watch Strictly Ballroom, I haven't seen it in a long time, but I remember liking it, and it's stylish. But I think that's the one where he is a little more restrained. But then, boy, does he just go for it with Romeo plus Juliet, right? And then Moulin Rouge, holy cow! Like that's where it just like it's coming out of the screen. Um, and then so like I haven't rewatched Australia in forever. Um, do you have any thoughts on Australia? Like, what do you think? It's certainly
I've
didn't.
seen it once, and I don't remember enough about it.
Yeah,
Like it seemed fine.
yeah. It's
What?
just not special in the same way that the others feel.
No, and I think and to your point about people's criticism of like Colonel Tom Parker, I mean, he's essentially our film's narrator,
Yeah.
right? Like, so
Hmm.
he's got to have a big part in it. And that is something that we experienced in Moulin Rouge that like Baz Luhrmann really did like kind of using that,
Hmm.
narrator vehicle and it worked for him there. And so he went to it again,
Yeah.
and so and the narrator in Moulin Rouge is somewhat cartoonish,
Well,
right? Like
I'm
the movie
trying.
itself is more cartoonish, like to the I'm
Yeah.
not saying it is,
Well,
but I'm
certainly
to
there are
use
a
the
number
term
of very cartoonish characters in Moulin Rouge. No,
right.
no
But
question. I was trying to
I'm sort of
remember.
just taking the term of the criticism, right? Like I don't feel like it was cartoonish, but like
Well,
yeah.
I actually I'm just briefly like, who was our do we have a narrator in Moulin Rouge? Because it's almost like
I
the
thought
music is it Toulouse-Lautrec?
yeah, Toulouse-Lautrec is our perspective. He's not
Yeah.
necessarily a narrator. Same as here. Like
Well, but like a lot of the narration is actually done with the songs in that movie. Like,
correct.
there
Yeah.
was a boy, a very strange enchanted boy, like all that stuff. But anyway, that's really neither
Yeah,
here
I'm
nor
not
there.
trying to draw it
Yeah.
as a direct. I'm saying that the taking the perspective
Yeah.
of sort of an outlandish character to look
Hmm.
into a world is something that was used in Moulin Rouge and
Yeah.
then was used
Right.
here.
Well, so I thought that the kind of so his performance, I would say, is kind of cartoony, but I
Yeah.
don't think that is a bad thing, because what I thought was actually pretty interesting about the character in there is making it kind of clear in a way that I don't want to pretend I'm an expert on the real Colonel Tom Parker, but it seems as though a big part of his whole deal was using that kind of folksy stuff to kind of get people to let their guard down so that he can worm his way in there into a way that they can't get him out.
Yes.
Like that was kind of his whole thing. And so the idea that he's sort of this weird cartoony half foghorn leghorn southern gentleman, except that he's actually also kind of scary in the terms of what he's actually trying to do, and having both of those pieces be real in the character, I thought was good and felt in keeping with the tone of the story to me. But I think there were certainly enough people who had that same reaction that, certainly everyone's going to have their own take on that.
Yeah. I
But
will say that though, I mean, they I did read somewhere, I don't remember the whole article or whatever. It was an interview with Lisa Marie Presley,
hmm,
and she absolutely loved this. She agreed that the same thing that I said that I felt when I watched this, that it really covered like her dad's like what she felt like happened to him, right?
hmm,
Whether it's the exact beats
yeah,
perfectly of what happened to him,
hmm,
it left her with the feeling of what she felt like happened to him.
right, yeah, because like this movie as a biopic is it is trying to operate more on that feeling level and less on the fact level, which isn't
Yeah.
to say that like it doesn't care about the facts at all, but it's more working from emotion than that. And so like on that basis, we talked a fair amount already about Tom Hanks there, but Austin Butler is the one who got the Oscar nomination, and he's wonderful
Yes.
in
Well, I
this.
think actually Tom Hanks might have gotten a Razzie,
Well, I
honestly.
wouldn't be surprised, but I hate the Razzies. I don't want to talk about Razzies. It's a bad organization.
I'll bring it up.
All right, so it's okay. I'm kind of teasing you. But yeah, I do hate the Razzies.
But yes, Austin Butler was phenomenal. This, so I didn't, I used kind of the third person
Mm-hmm.
narrative when I talked about Avatar of like other people that I know that have seen it.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't watch this movie with my dad, but I talked to him about it, and he was a huge Elvis fan and not a huge Baz Luhrmann fan. Like he's not. I mean, I think he's seen these other movies, but he's not like he doesn't
Mm-hmm.
think Romeo and Juliet is as cool as we do, right?
Yeah.
Because it was
Well,
speaking to people our age at that time.
yeah.
Like it's a very specific needle he's threading
Yeah.
with Romeo and Juliet. But
And
either way,
well, and just I'm sorry to interject just a little bit, but like Baz Luhrmann is one of those weird filmmakers where we look at that filmography that I just read. His last two movies were The Great Gatsby, Australia, and then before that Moulin Rouge, which is 22 years ago, and
yeah.
yet Baz Luhrmann is still a name where his name is the director, and we go, oh, is that going to be good?
Mhm. So anyway, father not a big fan of his style. watched this movie, and I think Austin Butler is what did it for him. Like,
Mm-hmm.
just he conveyed the emotion that, like you said, this movie's about feeling. It's about how you feel about Elvis, not about
Mm-hmm.
what happened to Elvis. It's about how you feel about what he went through and like how he grew and how he got manipulated in the end, and whether all the beats about how Colonel Parker did this are right or perfect, it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
This is the sort of the aggregation of this man's life and what it felt like. And my
Mm-hmm.
dad was like, it's like, I don't think I've ever like had that much of an emotional response to a movie. And it was like kind of weird that he
Hmm.
was like that into it. And I would say Austin Butler's depiction under Baz Luhrmann's direction is part of what got this, you know.
Right. Yeah. He's so good in it, and everything about the movie, and I mean, in a lot of respects, this is Baz Luhrmann's hallmark. Is that like even when he is, um, even with the movies that like aren't necessarily as great, like they look good. He's just got such a visual flair, and everything looks great. And so that's where we get all of these, production design and costumes and makeup and all of
Mm-hmm.
that stuff in there. And then, of course, this is always one of the side benefits of doing, biopics about famous musicians is you automatically get great music. I was kind of a late convert to Elvis. Like, obviously, he died before I was born, right? Like, wait, it was 1977 when he died? Maybe it was even the year I was born. But in any case, no contemporary awareness of him, only knowing of him through people remembering him. Um, and I don't know, I've always been the sort of person who doesn't listen to a lot of popular music, even oldies or whatever. So I discover things when it's 20 years old already or whatever. But literally, I was in my 20s before I ever really sort of consciously was aware of listening to an Elvis song and thinking about whether I thought it was good or not. Um, and, hot take, I thought Elvis was pretty good. I think he's a good singer. Got some good
Does
songs.
does
Now, that's not to say that every song he ever did was great, but certainly there's no question that the man had genuine talent, um, and and I think he has an interesting life as a result, and the movie benefits from having that music at to use to inform all of that, because it's not only, of course, what was really happening, but it so emotionally carries that whole thing. It can use our emotional response to those powerful songs to drive what we're wanting to feel in those scenes. And I think just the way it handled all of that, like my recollection, it's been a little while since I saw it, but my recollection is that Austin Butler, he's obviously performing on stage, but they're using Elvis's actual singing, is my understanding. Is that right?
that's what I remember, but
I
like I said,
believe that is correct. But in any case, I mean, that's probably the right call, essentially, just in this, like, there's so much. I think I read somewhere that he actually did do, like, Austin Butler was capable of doing a really good Elvis voice while singing. But that said, Elvis is just he's just such a famous voice that you can't help but feel like, is it gonna stand out and feel weird if it sounds even a little bit different? But that's always a trick. You know what it actually just makes me think of, is Weird, the Weird Al, biopic parody starring Daniel Radcliffe. That people should check out because it's actually a lot of fun. But in that, they make no effort whatsoever to disguise the fact that it's not Daniel Radcliffe singing. He talks in his Daniel Radcliffe voice, and then Weird Al's voice comes out when he sings, and it's like it's like they really don't even make an effort to have that um, uh, to have it not be obvious that that's what's going on there.
I just looked it up here. So Butler does the young Elvis,
Oh, okay.
and when he gets older, it is true that he uses true Elvis.
Okay, that's
So there's,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah,
You know what? I might have actually been conflating it in my head with what I was just saying about the Weird Al movie.
yeah,
Um, which I'll just finish by just once again telling people, if you didn't know about that movie at all, it is not a standard biopic. It is absolutely a parody biopic because, of course, what else would you ever do for a Weird Al movie? But it's great. I recommend it. People should watch it. But yeah, that's interesting that he did it for young Elvis.
well,
He did
because
a
those
great
are
job.
those are some of the lesser known, like it actually kind of works with the way the film builds its blocks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like because he's kind of rough around the edges, he's just sort of doing these songs, and then
Mm-hmm.
he kind of finds himself, and then I mean the conclusion is when he just like unleashes like Unchained Melody, when he's just like he's obese, he's on drugs, like
Mm-hmm.
he's everything that he shouldn't be able to perform, but yet he can still come out there and he just delivers just this banger,
Yeah.
right? And they had to use real Elvis for that, like that,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that like that is so like true to who he like to using true Elvis's voice, like I don't know, it makes that scene so impactful,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It's just one of those things where it's just that undeniable talent. You have all of these other reasons why it feels like this shouldn't work anymore, but then
Yeah,
he still had that, even if he
right.
was being
He was
stripped
on his
away
basically
otherwise.
on his deathbed, right? Like,
Yeah.
but he could just pull that out of his soul was like what the movie made you feel like, which
Yeah. Yeah.
again, like he really did give that performance, right? Like, so some
Mm-hmm.
of it's not just emotion,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So in any case, though, I think that like the some of the stuff that I only kind of knew before watching this was just like certainly knew that there was controversy about his sexy hip swiveling dancing and all of that, but like some of the the detail about literally like you're going to be arrested if you go on stage and and the pressure being put on him to just try to like, well, people like you, but if you just tone that down, then we don't have to deal with that part of it. Like just tone it down 20% and people will still come to see you and we don't have to deal with the police trying to arrest you. And yet him knowing, A, that's what the people who love me love is that stuff. And that's like who I am, like the authenticity of who he is as a performer is lost if he tones that back.
Right.
Not to mention just the sort of the you know 1960s rebellion of like who are you to tell me I can't dance? You know. um, but yeah, I liked it a lot. I thought it was fun to look at, fun to listen to. Just does all these things really well.
Yep. Really enjoyed it. I think honestly, like I think it has some shot at some of the costume and production design
Hmm.
stuff. Um,
Yeah, there's a lot of strong movies in those categories this year, though.
I know that's what but
Hmm.
this one was pretty good.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree completely. It's just it's got tough competition too. Um, Gosh, yeah, I need you to see everything everywhere all at once.
I've told you it's the one
Yeah,
that's on
yeah,
the
I know. I'm excited to talk about it. Is all. Um, yeah, but so anything else we want to touch on before we probably don't necessarily have half an hour of the Batman to talk about, but we can find what there is to discuss.
yeah.
All
I
right.
think we just move on to the Batman and
Okay, so the Batman, is nominated for three things. It's got best visual effects, um, best makeup and hairstyling, and I want to say like score or something. Let's see, where's the other one? I'm not finding it.
sound.
I thought
Visual effects, sound, and
Oh, and makeup
makeup
and
and
hairstyling.
hairstyling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. That so I was already too far up the list. Yeah, and I think those are the ones that make sense for it. Um, I mean, makeup. You've got for some reason you want to have the Penguin, and you cast Colin Farrell, who doesn't look anything like the Penguin, and then you use makeup to make Colin Farrell, who doesn't look anything like the Penguin, and make him look like the Penguin. Which is it's kind of a bizarre casting choice, but it works okay. The makeup is pretty good. I can't believe though that they're literally going to do a TV show of that version of the Penguin with Colin Farrell. It just seems crazy to me. I mean, maybe it'll be fine, but okay, right?
So yeah, I mean, I know you've joked a lot about it, but I I rewatched this movie with Abby again. I like bringing in these like third
Sure.
parties, so it's not just us.
Yeah.
When she realized that was Colin Farrell, she thought it was amazing that like he could do that. That he
Mm-hmm.
was like gave his essence to something where you couldn't recognize him at all.
Oh yeah.
And I know, you know, because I thought kind of the same way as you is like to your point, like you made the joke that like at some point, like if you put enough makeup on him, like why do you need Colin Farrell like
Mm-hmm.
to play the guy? But Abby truly felt like he conveyed the character in such a way, even through the makeup.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, all right, I'll take that. I mean,
I'm
if
I'm not dissing Colin Farrell's performance, and I'm not dissing the makeup. I'm just sort of feeling like there are great actors that already look like it just in some ways it makes it feel like they're just making extra work for themselves. That's my only point.
no, that's true, that's fair. Yeah.
I mean, I like Colin Farrell. You know, we talked about him a lot when we were talking Banshees of Inisherin. I think he's great. I like Colin Farrell. I remember the very first thing I recall seeing him in was Minority Report, which we've talked about on this, and how he just feels like. I mean, in some ways, he's like he's the antagonist before the real antagonist is revealed, right? But it feels almost like it could be his movie, right? Like it wouldn't take very much for it to be his movie where he's trying to hunt down this cop who is going to murder someone, right? Like he's great. I love Colin Farrell. But so I'm kind of just teasing the movie in that regard because it's a little bit like, uh, Christian Bale gaining a bunch of weight to play Dick Cheney. And it's like, but why though? I mean, it's one thing for movies where you want to show the same character at both skinny and fat to have a character, an actor who's going to do both of that. But when you're going to have a character who just like, why are you? There are people who already look like that.
Yeah.
But I guess you want to have the big name in any case. But yeah, so honestly, except for that piece of it, the whole makeup element of it, I have very little to say about the Penguin in the Batman. I mean, he's fine, but I just didn't care about the character very much.
Yeah, I mean he it's that's probably my one thing with the Batman that I wasn't I really liked it actually.
Yeah,
Like
no,
so I was
I
gonna
did
say,
too. Yeah, to be clear, I like it.
surprisingly, I was unsure of the need for it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we've talked enough about comic book movies. Batman's are probably the only ones that I really watch.
Mm-hmm.
I really like the Christian Bale ones. Like that series was really good.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel like there was a need for a
Mm-hmm.
new take on Batman.
Well, I
But
mean, the most recent ones we are coming off of are Batfleck, Ben Affleck in,
right, and they're part of that comic book universe that I don't really watch, right? So I
mm-hmm.
hadn't actually even seen those. So I was
Right.
like, they've kind of done this, they've done this. Like, can't Christian Bale's thing just sort of be the one, like sort of the defining trilogy? Can't we just leave it at that?
They're never going to
Robert
let Batman
Pattinson, I mean,
go.
he's the friggin', Twilight
Yeah.
guy. Like,
Mm-hmm.
is he gonna be that good? I had so much hesitation going into this.
Mm-hmm.
And it overwhelmingly like blew me away on every single part of it. Robert Pattinson is great.
Mm-hmm.
The mood of this movie is different. Like it almost like is an actual compliment to the Christian Bale movies, which were like they were telling a story for that time,
Hmm.
right? Like mid 2000s to 2010s. And this is telling the 2022, like, this is what dark feeling people and
Well,
things.
I thought it was surprisingly the most hopeful Batman movie I've ever seen outside of like the Adam West one.
I would agree with that,
Yeah.
but also told with very real
Hmm.
darkness about what
Right.
darkness looks like in 2022 to people.
Yeah. No, I agree completely. I think a um, making uh, Bruce Wayne into kind of an emo shut-in is a fun choice. I think, and I think Edward Pattinson plays that great. But what I also actually really, really liked, because I feel like we have never seen it in a Batman movie before, is let's make let's first of all let's re-emphasize the world's greatest detective part, have that actually be a meaningful part of his character, but also having him actually work with other people
Mm-hmm.
in a meaningful way. Because like, like this, I'm not throwing shade on the Christian Bale trilogy here, but like in those movies, I guess I don't really remember how much Catwoman played into the third one, but he's got Lucius Fox, he's got Alfred. It's kind of it, right? I mean, Gordon, some, I suppose, but he has just his own special people that he talks to them only in private. Whereas in this, he's actually like going to crime scenes while the police are there and having to actually interact with other people.
Mm-hmm.
He's having to deal with civilians. And in particular, the moment towards the end with the whole flood section, him realizing it's a problem that I'm so scary that the people I'm trying to help are frightened of me. It's one thing to say my whole thing is to be scary to criminals, but the whole point is that I'm supposed to be helping people. And if the people I'm trying to help are terrified and run away from me, that's a problem. And recognizing that and having him decide to be a hero instead of just vengeance.
Yes.
And that was
So
something I feel like I've never seen in a Batman movie before, and I loved it.
yes, you that I love how you just articulated that because that was honestly where I was going. Right, like it what it did, and so I was trying what I was kind of go back to my premise, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
Christian Bale took that sort of like that mantle in the late early 2000s of like, yeah, we're going to take this on and like I'm going to be the anti-hero who like but the real hero, right? But I'm going to kind of do my own thing. I'm going to do it my own way. I'm going to be the Elon Musk, the Steve Jobs, right? Like it's like that rise, right? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
that time. And then this is more like taking the emo, the but what it did is what I loved about it is it recaptured everything from Joker
Mm-hmm.
of like what it talked about with like feeling alone and whatever you want to call it, incel, like sadness,
Mm-hmm.
darkness, like what people are feeling in a dark place and are relating to. And when they were relating to Joker, like that was like it's almost like this movie's like, no, fuck that. Like, no, you don't know. That's not the way to go.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can do this and you can work with other people and you can realize that it's okay to not be about vengeance and like it's okay to be open to other people and they can help you and you can grow out of this. Like even if you're this hardcore like guy who still listens to Radiohead in 2023, like I mean I just loved how it took that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it made the guy who was like the Joker version of like the feeling the darkness,
Mm-hmm.
made him look like excuse my language, the fucking lunatic that you
Mm-hmm.
did not want to be like,
Yeah.
and sort
Uh,
of took that back. Like instead of the putting the lunatic part of darkness on the mantle that Joker did.
Mm-hmm.
It made the like, hey, there's a way out of this, right? To your
Yeah,
point about being hopeful. I loved all of that.
I agreed, and I was just thinking too. Just since you brought it up, not inappropriately, but I was just thinking how like they've put out the first image of Lady Gaga as she's going to be in the sequel of that, and it was just reminding me all over again how much I didn't care for that movie. I think that I mean, Joker has a great look. I think Joaquin Phoenix is a good performance, but I just don't like that story. I don't like the story they tell with him.
No, because it literally it's the opposite of what you just talked about, what you liked about this.
Mm-hmm.
It was taking that darkness and making it cool to like live in it,
Yeah.
as opposed to making it cool to find your way out through other people, which is what this movie does.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so like keying onto that, like, is the whole thing where they because they really play this out in the movie is that he says who are you, I am vengeance, right? Like that's the whole thing, but then he just realizes lots of people, like the people he's fighting, are saying that, and he has to start to grapple with like, well, okay, but what does actually make me different from them?
Which I love. And so this brought up another thing because I started going into this after I watched the Banshees.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even going to try to
Nina Sharon.
Sheeran and Barry Keoghan, who has a part in this movie, but has
Yeah.
an actual extended deleted scene from this movie
Mm-hmm.
where Robert Pattinson is going into Arkham to talk to him about like trying to understand the Riddler.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched that deleted scene, and obviously like Barry Keoghan is phenomenal,
Oh yeah, he's great. I
and
like him.
he's taking a lot of the things that people like about great Joker performances. Like there's a little of the Heath Ledger, there's a little of the
Mm-hmm.
Joaquin Phoenix, but he's got his own spin on it.
Yeah.
But that interaction, which I'm not sure why they took it out, if other than they just didn't want to like make us feel like we were being teased of another Joker movie.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it may have just been to try to not make too like to not try to invite too much comparison with that with Joker. You
Which
know.
is fair. But when you think about it, the way that where the scene was designed to do
Mm-hmm.
is that what Joker is basically doing is he's the one that can kind of like call out that, wait, hey, no, like you and him are the same. Like you guys are talking about the
Mm-hmm.
same stuff. And it's what makes him internalize and be like, oh no, no, no. Like I'm not the same, but I
Mm-hmm.
can't, I have to do something different to be
Right.
not the same.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what a funny year though for Paul Dano. I mean, you haven't seen the Fablemans yet,
I haven't.
but his Riddler in this, and then playing Sammy Fableman's dad, Steven Spielberg's dad in the Fablemans is fun. I mean, I like Paul Dano. I think he's good in both roles, and I like I won't say that this is my favorite iteration of the Riddler in all of Batman media. I think he's better than the Jim Carrey version. Although I haven't watched that one in forever. Maybe he's fine. I don't know.
That
But
was doing a different
it's a
thing.
very different take, obviously. But that said, I liked this take, even though I think some of the like cartoon takes I've seen are my preference ultimately. But this one felt authentic to the more sort of grounded setting that they're working with here, right? Um, where things are still happening in a heightened comic booky way, but not quite as comic booky as the cartoons are, right? And so the guy in the bright green suit with the bowler hat and
Yeah.
the cane with the question mark on the head, is maybe a little much for the tone that they're going for here. But I liked them doing with that character. He's not as good as Killmonger, but they're doing that thing a little bit where he's got some legitimate grievances, and the people he's targeting are not good, But at the same time, you can't really just let him do that. Like that's not how an orderly society can function with
Right.
people doing what he's
Well,
doing.
that's where that deleted scene with the Joker kind of
Hmm.
like puts them together because it's like, well, you saying you are vengeance, you've just decided that the people that you're going after are okay, and the people that he's going after are not okay.
Yeah.
When really it
Yeah.
is more complex than that, and
Hmm.
that's what that scene is meant to give us, that realization of like, no, it's not the same, but you also need to check yourself and not just
Hmm.
be vengeance, right?
Yeah.
Because that's the Riddler's kind of being vengeance,
Hmm.
also. You know,
Uh, and I think, obviously it is a well touched on trope at this point, the whole idea of the whole Batman and Joker relationship. But I do always like the piece of that trope that is Joker just gets Batman. He gets Batman better than Batman does.
hmm.
It's just that his conclusion from that insight is to think it's all hilarious and fascinating and funny. But he just sees right through all of Batman's posturing. And he thinks that's hilarious, and that's part of what makes him such a good foil to Batman, because Batman is kind of all posturing. Like he's really does have the skill and technique to to accomplish a lot. But the whole gimmick of the bat costume and coming out of the shadows and being this, striking fear into the hearts of the criminal mind and all of that sort of thing, that's all posturing. And so it just does not work at all on Joker, because he's just like, oh no, I get what you're doing. I think that's great. It's hilarious. I love what you're doing. It's so funny. And I like that take on Joker.
Yes, I like that as well.
Hmm.
I will say that. So, a couple of funny things again to bring in. I'll bring Abby back into the conversation.
Sure.
My
No,
wife,
that's fine.
for
Yeah.
anybody who doesn't know. So I was watching this movie. I don't know why I decided to rewatch this movie. There was just something like I when it came up in the Oscar thing, I was like, I could
Hmm.
spend my time watching a new movie, but I kind of want to rewatch this movie. And I don't know what drove me to do that. And I don't
Hmm.
think, unless I told you on text, like if I was feeling something different that I told you, I anyway, started
No.
watching it. She was off doing something with her friends, came home and kind of caught back into the back half of the movie and was like, oh no, yeah, no, keep watching it. Like you don't have to turn it off. I'll keep watching it. And we sat there and watched it and like we kind of left it and she was like, the scene where he recruits those guys to go to that stadium and like go up on the catwalks to kill people. She's like, that was one of the most terrifying things I've ever seen. Like, I'm actually surprised they even let that into modern media because of like what she's worried. And I was like, but Abby, that's the problem. Is like, number one, that's hard to do.
Hmm.
But that is actually how some of these shootings have happened, is that
Yeah.
like people have done this. Like, he's not telling people how to do it. Like, he's actually
Well,
mirroring a thing that's happened.
yeah, it happens over and over again that in these real world, violent assaults, mass shootings, and so on, you can almost every single time find that they are all that person has an extensive social media profile where they're following all sorts of people who clearly ratcheted them up to when they
Right.
get a
And
breaking point.
all this movie is doing is trying to take and say this guy's so compelling that he gets multiple people to do it as opposed
Hmm.
to a person to do it.
Yeah.
And that's meant to be terrifying. Like it's meant to
Yeah.
be that. It's super dark.
Well,
And it's saying like this guy's that compelling, right?
that's actually the another piece of the whole Batman mythos that I feel like is the first time that we've really seen depicted on screen. Well, I don't know. Maybe I don't want to. That's maybe overstating it. But the idea of these villains having gangs and having minions who actually work for them, it is something that in many Batman movies is true, but we don't necessarily see why it would be true,
Right.
right? Like I recently rewatched the original, the 1989 Batman, the Michael Keaton one with Jack Nicholson as the Joker, and he has a whole crew, right? But there is no logical reason in that movie why any of them would work for him. Like he kind of takes over an existing mob infrastructure by killing the leader and completely changing up the way they do everything. And all of those guys just keep working for him. I don't know. I'm not sure I buy that, but it also doesn't matter because that's not what the movie cares about. But I think it's interesting that this movie does kind of touch on that. And the reason I kind of started to qualify that is because to some extent that is actually part of what Joker is doing that's a little interesting is it's showing how someone who acts that way impacts other people.
Right.
So, like, I
And
don't like Joker, but it does do interesting things in some regards, and I think that's one of them.
yeah, and so that was particularly terrifying because we go to tons of sporting events and like it tells it in such a real way where you're taking a real thing that happens,
Mm-hmm.
influence over social media, and you're taking saying this guy is so good that he got all these dudes to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, wow, that's like scary. So like it was truly scary for her. But then to your point about the hopefulness, like she still left the movie like feeling good about like where the universe was going and like loving Catwoman's impact and like all that stuff to the point where she
Mm-hmm.
actually had a presentation at work where she had to like create characters for a CRM system
Mm-hmm.
that she made all of it like Batman themed. So like the main account was like Wayne Enterprises, Bruce Wayne was the contact and like all that. And she gave the presentation with cat ears on. Like and even and mentioned that she had just watched the Batman again and
Mm,
loved it. So it's it's an impactful movie to
yeah.
people who aren't even like don't watch comic book movies ever. Like me,
Mm-hmm.
I don't watch a ton. She watches zero. And for both of us to be really impacted by this movie, like
Mm-hmm.
I really liked it. And I mean, and I think again, I've talked about the Joker's deleted scene, but his
Mm-hmm.
actual scene in the movie, I mean, what a great ending where he tells the Riddler a riddle and says, what is it? What's
Yeah.
more valuable the less of it you have, or something?
Oh, yeah.
And it's
I don't remember.
friends.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So each one becomes more valuable the less total that you have, or
Right.
whatever. And it's friends.
Mm-hmm.
And they start laughing and like he's like oh yeah Fred, you know what a great riddle
Mm-hmm.
but they're like that interaction of like oh yeah see like yeah I mean if you don't have any friends I can be your friend like I don't know just whole thing is kind of it
Yeah.
just left in this weird cackling
Yeah.
note where you're like ah
Yeah. I agree. I liked it a lot, and you know, Batman, something to it. You know, like as a character, as an archetype. You know, especially just in the sense that I think Batman is one of the more fascinating characters in all of this because over the decades and decades that people have been making movies or comics or whatever about Batman, so many different takes that have a fairly wide spectrum, right?
yeah
Of tone, of you know, like how serious they are, what they act like, you know, who is Bruce Wayne, who is Batman, what's the psychology there, what are the villains like. But it's amazing how that character concept is so plastic in that way. You know what I mean? That he's cool even across all of these different, wildly different takes.
yeah
One of my good friends from online has a speech that she's done a couple of times, which is, I believe the title of it is "My Batman is not your Batman, and that's okay."
I love that
Mm-hmm.
without even knowing the speech I love the title
Yeah,
yeah
yeah. Jadzia Axelrod is great, by the way. Anyone should check her out. She recently got to do her own uh, officially DC Comics canon graphic novel about original characters. So that's you know she's doing good right now. She's great.
nice
Um,
I mean that kind of sums up kind of what I was saying of my interjection into this movie is that my my definitive Batman I felt like was Christian Bale. Like
mm,
I'd watched all the other Batmans, I liked them,
yeah.
but that was kind of like that was my Batman. and I was like, "There's no, I don't need another Batman. I don't need this movie.
Hmm.
I don't need it from the Twilight guy." And man, did it won me over. And it was
Hmm.
like, okay, it's different, and I can still go back and watch
Hmm.
The Dark Knight Rises and
You
hell
know,
yeah, kick ass like all day long, and then I can watch this and be like, yeah,
I
we
should
could listen to some
rewatch The Dark
Radiohead and
Knight.
kind of be cool,
I should
like
rewatch The Dark Knight Rises because that's, I think, the only one that I haven't rewatched. I saw it in the theater, and I liked parts of it, but it was kind of just like overall, I felt it was a letdown after The Dark Knight, and so I was a little frustrated with it. But
I think you will now that, especially now that you kind of have probably seen more of Tom Hardy's work. Like
I don't think I ever had a problem with Tom Hardy. In fact,
I
his
no, but
like,
I think going back and watching it, like I think you will see what he did in that movie, and
oh, yeah,
you'll be
well,
like,
maybe I need to
all right,
rewatch it. Honestly, it was never the Bane stuff that I had a problem with, though. That was never what I objected to. Um, but I mean, Tom Hardy's Bane voice is great. I mean, people make fun of it, but it's everybody knows it. You know, people don't even have to have seen that movie for a Bane voice joke to work,
mhm.
right? Like it's, like he's like it was, and it's especially since it was such a thing with the mask, and apparently them having to like at the last minute go back and like re-record his dialogue to make it so you could actually understand what he was saying. Anyway, sorry, but yeah, I just haven't watched that one in forever. But yeah, like you didn't even see any of the ones with Ben Affleck, who of course we have, Batman versus Superman, Dawn of Justice, and then the Justice League in both incarnations, the Joss Whedon one and the Zack Snyder's Justice League take. And I'll certainly say that, like, no offense at all to Ben Affleck as an actor, but I don't like the take on Batman in those movies. Um, I think he's fine in the Justice League ones. Like, none of the problems with Justice League are his fault. But Batman versus Superman, I don't like at all, and I think Batman's a big problem in that movie. Um, and well, that that's a whole other conversation. I'm just going to cut that off right now because I could go on and on about that. But that's also one of those online discourses that's already been done to death, and I don't need to make
That's
Zack Snyder fans mad at me.
before, if in case anybody actually does listen to this, I just realized I had a massive faux pas earlier and made the joke about like listening to Radiohead when it's Nirvana that is it's
Well, and I just let it go right by because I was just kind of like, what my problem there was, I don't know Radiohead as a band well enough to know whether what you said was right or not.
no, it was they're both bands that I like in that kind of dark
Sure.
kind of concept. But no, this the songs in Batman are Nirvana.
Okay.
And I did that without even looking it up. Like it just sort of dawned on me. I was
You just
like,
realized, oh no, I've made a terrible mistake.
because I was thinking about somebody else that like one of my other friends that really liked this movie, and he said he listened to Nirvana for a week straight after watching the movie, and I was like, well, that's weird since Radiohead is no, it was a Nirvana. It's Nirvana songs. Um, so anyway, I've corrected myself. No one correct me in the comments. I'm good.
All right. Well, so in any case, we ended up talking more about the Batman than I expected, but it's
Yeah,
mostly just because, like, it's actually pretty good.
I think I
I
liked it
think.
more than you expected.
Well, I guess I don't know. I don't know that I had a lot of expectation about it as much as just I thought it might be the sort of thing where, I mean, it's kind of like when we talked about, last time we talked about Top Gun Maverick for only like 10 minutes because it would just kind of came down to like, yeah, I mean, it's pretty good. What else is there to say about it? You know?
Which that makes sense, but I
Mm-hmm.
think what we obviously identified here is that its place in the Batman universe was interesting enough that like that part of it to discuss like how it's
Mm-hmm.
different, how it
Yeah.
fits. That probably drove the extra 20 minutes
Mm-hmm.
that
Well,
but
so in any
anyway,
case, yeah, but it's also,
we
nice to be
we
on
are
the same
done.
page there. Not that we aren't often on the same page, but in any case, yeah.
Done
Uh,
we are.
all right, so I think that's where we'll leave it for now. We'll be back when there's more movies that we've both seen. I'll just go ahead and shout out. I kind of mentioned this at the start in the video that we won't have good audio, but I'll just kind of go ahead and shout out that of the Best Picture nominees that I think people should try to make a point of seeing if you haven't already. Everything Everywhere All at Once is still my favorite, although it's I am honestly surprised at how well and how popular that has been, because as much as I love it, it's very weird in the specific ways that I often like, but generally find that other people don't share my feelings on. And so I'm kind of surprised that it's had such a broad appeal in that basis. But I love it. I think it's wonderful. The Fablemans is not as cheesy as the trailer makes it look. It's also very good. Tar, I just saw, and it's incredible, but also I found extremely stressful to watch. Like, like literally sort of like biting your nails, what's going to happen now, sort of tension as it builds towards the end. But it's very good. Kate Blanchett's incredible in it. All Quiet on the Western Front, impeccably done. I don't know why it needs to exist. I mean, it's another war movie. You know what I mean? Like, it's fine, but I also just kind of felt like I guess better to keep making war is terrible movies rather than go back to war is awesome movies. But yeah, it just felt like I've seen 7 other movies like this. That's what it felt like. I have not seen Women Talking. Triangle of Sadness, I did not care for. I respect what it's trying to do, but didn't enjoy the experience. But yeah, so I would say of the ones that we haven't talked about here yet, Everything Everywhere All at Once, The Fablemans, Tar would be the ones that I would prioritize.
Those will be my priorities.
Cool. Also Best Animated Feature. You've got I've only seen 4 of those 5, but all 4 of those are excellent.
I'm looking forward to those.
Yeah. All right, so I will let's leave it there, and we'll be back to talk about more Oscar nominations. But in the meantime, everyone, watch good movies.
Good movies.